most singularly challenging classes to teach is Wine 1.0. The reason is because it's nearly impossible, even in the space of 90 minutes, to cover a subject as vast as wine and do it any kind of justice. What we normally do is drink our way through 6 different wines from 6 different regions made from 6 different grapes. But today, I'm going to try to get through the basics in the time that it takes me to drink this glass of Vinho Verde. Wine is fermented grapes, or essentially the fermented product of grapes. That could also include skins, stems, and other things, which is why we say product. Wine can be made from other things. It can be made from blueberries, raspberries, but at least in the EU and the United States, that has to be specified on the label. The wines that we're talking about today are made from grapes, mostly Vinus vinifera, the species from which most commercial wines are made. Fermentation is simply the process by which yeast converts sugar, like the sugar found naturally in grapes, into alcohol. That's how grape juice becomes wine. Other beverages, such as beer and spirits, are fermented. Spirits are also not only fermented, but distilled, which is why they're so much stronger and more potent than wine or beer. Wine is largely comprised of water, alcohol, sugars sometimes, acids, and polyphenols like tannins. There are other things in wine such as esters, aldehydes, sulfites, and dissolved gases. Sulfites are used extensively in the winemaking process. They are a natural preservative, but they're also a byproduct of fermentation, which is why it's really, really hard to get away from them, even if no additional or limited additional sulfites are used in the winemaking process. Viticulture is the intentional act of cultivating grapes, in other words, not just letting them grow wild. Vinification is the art and science of winemaking. That's everything that happens once the grapes are harvested. I think people have this romantic idea of this castle-like winery on this estate covered in vines, and that does exist. But oftentimes, where the grapes are grown and where the wine is made is 2 completely different places, and it's performed by 2 completely different entities. Wine made from Vitis vinifera dates back at least 8,000 years to the place that is now Georgia. That's the country, not the state. Initially, the Greeks were responsible for spreading viticulture throughout the Mediterranean, and the Romans picked up where the Greeks left off, taking their vines and their wines wherever they conquered and pillaged. After the Roman Empire fell, continuity was left to the Catholic Church, and in fact, many viticulture and vinification techniques were perfected by monks. Religion and wine have always been closely entwined. Much later, when Europe began to explore the world by sea and to colonize Africa, the Americas, parts of Asia and Oceania, they took wine with them as well. People who were leaving home or going to be away from home for extended periods of time considered it close enough to their heart and to their way of life to not want to leave it behind. The idea that wine spread throughout the world by colonization is a touchy subject, which we'll get into shortly, but the takeaway here is that the history of wine mirrors the history of civilizations. All right, types of wine. When I normally address a new class and I ask them, give me the 2 broadest categories of wine that you can, usually they answer red and white. I would submit to you that those are more styles of wine, and what we often look for as wine professionals when we're looking for that jumping off point to describe a wine is whether it's Old World or New World. Old World means Europe. New World means not Europe. Because these terms do reference colonialism or colonization, Some people don't like them, and we're trying to retrain ourselves not to use them. I do think it's important to acknowledge the past and, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because again, it's hard to talk about not just the history of wine or the history of beverage, but any of our histories without talking about some things that were not good. And I think we're all smart enough to realize that we can celebrate the wine without celebrating colonization. I think we're smarter than that. That being said, use the terms that make you happy, just as long as we all understand what we're talking about. Old World or Europe generally emphasizes place or terroir. New World emphasizes, some people will say the grape, I would say the winemaker or the winemaking, the process. Old World, it's all about tradition. New World, more about innovation. See how that makes sense? Old World tends to be cooler climate. New World tends to be a little bit warmer climate. That leads to, in the Old World, wines that kind of have an earthy or a savory characteristic, where in the New World we get riper, fruitier flavors and aromas. Finally, in the Old World, we get rules. There are more rules when it comes to winemaking. And in the New World, there are fewer rules for the winemaker and the wine grower, the producer, to follow. These are broad generalizations, but they do help us with a starting off point when we're trying to figure out what's in the glass and why we like it or don't. Terroir is a French word for which there is no strict English translation. Some people will say, well, it's the dirt, as in the soil where the grapes are grown, but it means a little bit more than that. It's the soil, it's the weather, it's the climate, it's the aspect of the slope, it's the angle of the sun, it's all the physical things that affected the grapes in the vineyard. A wine region can be as large as a country or as small as a tiny village. Take France, for example, one of the world's preeminent wine growing regions. Within France, we have a place called Bordeaux, quite celebrated. But within Bordeaux, we have the Haut-Médoc. And within the Haut-Médoc, we have Saint-Julien, which is a village. People sometimes assume that the smaller and more specific the region is, the higher quality the wine will be, but this is not always true. An appellation, which may or may not mirror the region, is basically a geographical boundary with rules. In the New World, like we discussed, the rules are mainly geographic and will mirror whatever the local wine law is with respect to the percentage of grapes of a certain type or a particular vintage. In the Old World, though, the appellation can come with rules including the maximum yields of the grapes used in the wine, the types of grapes used in the wine, even the amount of alcohol, minimum or maximum, in the finished wine. Classification is sometimes used interchangeably with appellation. For example, if I don't want to follow the rules of my appellation as a winemaker, I can choose to declassify. In other words, use a different, broader appellation that allows me to do whatever it is that I want to do. However, there's certain classifications that exist outside of the appellation or in addition to the appellation. For example, you have the first through fifth growths in Bordeaux, which are supposed to rank the quality of the chateau of the producer. Then we have the predicate system in Germany, which ranks the ripeness of the grapes at harvest. And we have terms like Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva in Spain, which specify how and how long a wine is aged. We talked a little bit before about white and red wine, and I would submit to you that these aren't just colors, but denote different styles of winemaking. For example, in white wine production, the grapes are pressed almost immediately off the skins after harvest, whereas in red wine production, the juice and the skins are fermented together, two different styles of winemaking. That's where red wine gets its color. Then you have the in-between styles, such as rosé, where red grapes are used but there's just a limited amount of skin contact, maybe a few hours instead of a few days, which is why it's a lighter color. Then we have orange and amber wines, which are white grapes made in the style of red wine. Extended skin contact, that's where they get their color from, as well as their phenolics and their other qualities. Finally, we have dry versus sweet. It's important to realize when you're talking to a wine professional that this is a function of residual sugar. It has nothing to do with the ripeness or fruitiness of the flavors and aromas in the wine. So if we have a dry wine, that's a wine that has almost no detectable residual sugar. If we're talking about a sweet wine or a dessert wine, we have many different subcategories here. The wine could be late harvest, it could be ice wine, it could be the product of dried grapes, or it could be fortified. A good wine is any wine that you like. However, when we talk about something as seemingly subjective as quality, we have to establish some kind of a common vocabulary or a way to quantify what it is that we're talking about. In many schools of wine philosophy, we look at a couple of different things. We look at intensity, or sometimes that's referred to as concentration of the wine. We look at its balance, we look at its complexity, and we look at its length, the length of the finish, how long the wine stays with you after you've taken a sip. A wine that exhibits even one of these traits could be considered acceptable, whereas a wine that exhibits all of them is outstanding. When we move on to Wine 2.0, we're going to talk a lot more about cause and effect, so we can really start to identify the wines, the types of wines that we love. For now, it's important to realize that a wine is a reflection of the environment in which the grapes were grown and the decisions that were made by the producer. It's virtually impossible to be curious about wine without also becoming curious about history, science, and culture. Wine is a great way to explore the world without ever leaving home. And for those of you that say, no, you gotta get off your ass and explore, sure, but I don't know any of you that have a time machine, and that's what wine allows us to do. It allows us to experience a particular thing from a particular place at a particular moment in time. That's pretty fucking cool. How did I do? I cheated, I refilled.